How do you speak, sound, and look like a leader? Words are important, but what about your voice? I'm so thrilled to explore how to lead with your voice. I'm Lynda Katz Wilner, founder of Successfully Speaking. I'm honored to interview Allison Shapira, founder and CEO of Global Public Speaking, Harvard lecturer, keynote speaker, and a singer-songwriter. We met several years ago at the National Speakers Association DC chapter meeting, where we're both members, and I immediately connected to her work and the clients that she serves. We approach public speaking in complementary backgrounds. Mine, speech and language pathology, and Allison's from music or singing. But I'll let Allison explain that further. Welcome, Allison.
Thank you, Lynda. What a treat to be with you.
It is, and I've been looking forward to this interview because of the common areas that we work in. So I'm excited to explore that with you. And the first thing I'd like to ask you, I mentioned about a singer-songwriter. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today. Where did you start?
My first career path was training to be an opera singer. That's what I thought I was going to do with my life. I went to a performing arts high school and college for vocal performance, and then realized for many reasons it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I wound up leaving the field of opera, but very soon realized that everything I learned as a singer actually made me a really good public speaker and an even better coach, because as singers, all we do when we're not speaking is critique other singers. So it gave me a very strategic eye and ear for others to pick up on subtle shifts in others' nonverbal communication or verbal communication that made me a great coach. So I wound up starting my own business, teaching public speaking because of that experience, training to be an opera singer.
And I know you haven't left singing completely, but not opera singing, correct?
That's right. About 10 years ago, I realized I missed singing. I didn't miss opera, but I missed singing folk music, which is what I grew up singing around the house. And so I started to learn to play the guitar so I could sing at open mics. And the combination of self-sufficiently playing the guitar and singing together turned into this magical combination. And surprising myself more than anyone else, I started writing songs and I became a singer-songwriter. And now I have this side career performing as a singer-songwriter.
And I know you also merge the two at times with your keynote speaking, correct?
That's right. So at the end of my keynotes, I actually sing a brief piece of opera to make a point about authenticity over perfection and to share my own story of finding my voice, which didn't really happen until a couple of years ago. So it's quite a journey that I talk about.
So you said finding your voice, and I know you also talk about leading with your voice. Tell us a little bit about that.
The concept of leading with your voice recognizes that each one of us has something powerful to say, whether it's on behalf of ourselves, our family, our community, our clients. And so it's never just about speaking up in a meeting, pitch, or presentation. I believe public speaking, which is speaking to one person or more, is a form of leading with your voice, because every time you speak, you can use your voice to speak up on behalf of others. And so that's what it means to lead with your voice, to recognize you have an incredibly powerful tool that you can use every day to bring people together to achieve a shared vision, which is leadership.
And I love that, because that's how we're a little bit different, in that when I think voice, I think purely how you sound, and I think of speech as what you say. But you're saying voice is the content as well as the delivery of your message. Is that correct?
That's right. And I really appreciate you showing the differentiation. When I say voice, I actually mean an individual's self-actualization. I know that's really wordy and there are a lot of syllables there, but it is the self-actualization of who we are and who we want to be. And by voicing it out loud, we bring it to life.
Mm-hmm. Well, what holds some people back from voicing it?
Usually, the biggest barrier is ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't take time to listen to ourselves. We judge or prejudge whatever we think, so then we never speak it aloud. We don't think we have anything to say,
Mm-hmm.
or we think we don't have a right to say it. And that might be valid. We might be in an unsafe environment where nobody wants to hear it. So sometimes it's not just us. It could be that we're in an environment where it is not safe to speak up, or where
Mm-hmm.
people don't want to listen. Sometimes that's a real environment, and sometimes that environment is imagined in our head based on where or how we grew up.
So some of it's situational, that I better not speak up here because it's not safe. And some of it is the self-talk or the lack of confidence that you might have. Correct?
That's right. That's right. It's really both. And there are so many other factors that silence us,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's a lack of clarity. So if we're not sure what to say, we just won't say anything at all. Or again, it's a lack of knowing whether or not we should speak up. So there's so much nuance to whether or not we make the decision to speak up, which can actually hold us back from exercising leadership on a topic
Mm-hmm.
because we don't know what to say.
And I can add, and I think you mentioned it already, just the fear of how people will judge us. Do we sound smart enough? Do we sound innovative enough? Did somebody just say that? And so why are we reporting it? So I think that that's very interesting how you look at voice, because I think you're taking it to a different level. I'm more of a technician to improve the aspects of the voice, whereas you're talking about the overall idea of speaking up and becoming a leader. So I think that's
That's right. It's the more meta view where you're
Mhm,
looking at the micro view, and we need
mhm,
both.
mhm,
One is not sufficient without the other. So they're very much, that's why I've also always felt that we were very much in alignment
mhm,
in what we teach, and we're looking at it from different ways.
mhm.
You, with your own very specific years of expertise and your certification and your degrees that reinforce what you do. And I always admire that.
Oh, thank you. And it's the outcomes we're looking for, correct? So with what you have, that meta level that you just mentioned, and then if there are some areas that need to be tweaked a bit, that will just help bring it all together.
That's
And
right.
how do you help people? You're helping them lead with their voice and being their authentic self. What about the nervousness? How do you get involved in that, on helping people get up there on that stage or at that meeting and speak when they have all of this anxiety about it?
It's such a real issue. And what I think surprises most people is that most people feel it. Some level of nervousness or anxiety. I get nervous before every speech or presentation
Mhm,
or important client call.
mhm,
I get nervous
mhm,
because I know what's at stake. And when I'm not nervous, that's actually when I start to get sloppy. That's
mhm,
when I make mistakes. So
mhm,
there's an element of recognizing that nervousness is important and harnessing it,
mhm,
turning those nerves into excitement. All of that is reframing the
mhm,
purpose and the act of feeling nervousness. Now, the important component here is not to let the nerves control you, because usually what happens is when we feel nervous, we feel that physically, as you
mhm,
know, and I'm sure you know this more than I do, it constricts our breathing
mhm,
and it physically affects us and then makes us show up not as our best selves because the nerves are controlling us. Our voice is thinned out, or it's we get that vocal fry because we're
mhm,
not breathing,
mhm,
which doesn't let us self-regulate.
mhm,
And so what I do is I use breathing techniques, I use visualization techniques, and I use empowerment techniques
mhm,
so that we can tap into our own sense of purpose as a source of confidence, and then use breathing and breath support to be able to harness those nerves. And then in addition, I also like to be practical about it. What's making you nervous?
mhm.
Are you afraid you'll forget what you're going to say? Okay, have notes.
Right.
Are you afraid that that you don't know the room. All right, get there early and know the room. So control all the variables that you can control, and that reduces the nervousness.
Mhm. I love that. And we're speaking the same language because I do exactly the same thing. Whereas, what is that cognitive piece? What's going on in your mind? And I love what you said, Allison, about that you need to be nervous or you get sloppy. And I
Mhm.
remember early in my career when I was so nervous, I was in my 20s, which was just a few years ago, but I was speaking at conferences and I was very
Mhm.
nervous. And one of my mentors said to me, the morning you get up to give a speech and you're not nervous, that's the day you should start to worry. Like embrace it. Like you said, know it. It's your adrenaline, it's your excitement. It helps you perform as long as it doesn't control you. So
That's right. That's exactly right. I really appreciate that advice you received.
and I'll mention because I've been doing this for years, but I've also read your wonderful book and everything I was reading, it's like, wow, we've come from different camps and still approach it very similarly. Because getting up and performing as a singer is not that different from getting up and performing as a speaker. You still have the thoughts in your head and you still have the physiological responses that you have to address. So
That's right.
I appreciate that you're saying that, and it's so much it's so important, but I don't think people think that, Allison, and I don't think people realize when they're so nervous, they also cannot think. The oxygen isn't going to their brain,
Mhm.
so they need to harness that. So when you're dealing with companies, how do you feel that addressing, and I think some of it is obvious, but I'm curious your framework, your perspective here is how does it benefit when you work with somebody? How does it benefit that person's career as well as the company's success if they work on their public speaking?
One of the reasons my team and I work so often with companies is because they recognize that benefit. They see that their investment in their team's speaking skills, the skills of the individuals on their team, will benefit the company ultimately.
Mhm,
And the reason is when we speak up in a meeting, that's partially how our leadership readiness is measured by our organization.
mhm,
So I've had numerous executives say to me when they send their teams to me to go through our programs, they'll say, if you're in the room for a meeting, we expect you to speak up. Don't just sit there.
mhm,
And so for those individuals, it's recognizing you have something important to say.
mhm,
Maybe it's on behalf of the clients or on behalf of that one voice that's not being heard in the room. So building your communication skills lets you speak up in a meeting, which again is an act of leadership,
mhm,
because by speaking up, you can change the direction of that meeting, which might change the course of your department, which could change the trajectory of the company. So there's such a very clear line between you speaking up and affecting change even at the organizational or the national level.
mhm,
That's why so many companies are investing in the individual communication skills of their teammates. And so that individual's skills then help them move up in their career. They also help those individuals feel a greater sense of purpose and fulfillment and satisfaction because they're given the opportunity to express themselves
mhm,
and speak up. So that leads to them staying for longer in the organization. So retention is positively
mhm,
affected as well. And then finally, when those individuals go to conferences or networking events and they speak clearly and concisely, then they're bringing more visibility to the organization and its work. So it's win-win
mhm,
all around for companies to invest in
mhm,
these skills, both from the individual and the organizational
mhm.
perspectives.
I have this question because I know you speak to groups around the world, and I know you've
Mhm,
spoken to, let's say, for example, women in Africa.
mhm.
How do you deal with some of, and I think I made that a loaded question, but I was going to say, how do you deal with some of the cultural differences when it comes to public speaking or leading with your voice? Because there are cultural differences as well as gender differences. How do you deal with that?
Absolutely. It's such a great question. In all my work around the world with women and men and everyone, I've come to realize There are elements of communication that are universal,
Mhm.
and then there are elements that are highly cultural. What's universal? Everyone gets nervous.
Mhm.
I was sitting at a breakfast in where was I? In Morocco, sitting next to a woman from Mali, and when she heard what I did, she said, "Oh my goodness, I'm so nervous. I'm so afraid of public speaking. I don't want to look foolish in front of my peers." I mean, any one of us could say that anywhere in
Mhm.
the
Sure.
world. What's culturally different is how we express ourselves, the extent to which we use emotion, the
Mhm.
extent to which we use eye contact,
Mhm.
especially when we talk about gender,
Mhm.
women speaking to men in different cultures. The extent of the eye contact is highly cultural.
Mhm.
What I find universal is, interestingly enough, the set of expectations of women around the world are remarkably similar in terms of the gender norms of women. There certainly is variety according to where specifically, but around the world, you see women being socialized to adhere to a certain set of expectations about how women should act. And very often, the expectations of how a leader should act are
Mhm.
not the gendered expectations of women. And so when women exercise leadership, they're confronting those cultural stereotypes,
Mhm.
and there can be boundaries, and not boundaries, well, there are boundaries, but there can be challenges as a result,
Mhm.
as they're pushing back against those gender stereotypes. So it becomes even more important for them around the world to strategically ask themselves, which cultural expectations do I want to respect, and which do I want to strategically start to push back on? And who do I know who can join with me in that, so we can build a coalition around it and not just me do it myself?
That's very interesting. So you're talking about disrupting some of the expectations, but having support along the way. So you're not the only one doing that. Is that right?
That's right. That's right. And that is an act of leadership to do that.
Mhm. Mhm. But knowing your audience to know where you can do that.
That's right, because there are audiences for which it is unsafe to push back against
Mhm.
those norms.
Mhm.
And so it's up to you to know when and how, with the help of others. And the last thing I want to do as an American woman traveling around the world is give people advice that puts them at physical or
Sure.
political or social risk to do so. So
Mhm.
there's so much nuance involved that we have to be aware of. And at the same time, there's a remarkable universal need for self-determination, for self-actualization, to be able to act out on what you're passionate about. Doesn't
Mhm.
matter who I work with around the world, everyone feels passionate about something
Mhm.
and feels a desire to speak up about that passion. We just have to figure out the best way how for them, given where they are and who they want to
Mhm.
address.
Mhm. Which is complex.
Hugely
Yeah.
complex.
I mean, it sounds very simple what the goal is, but you're coming up against so much tradition and culture and bias and just the expectations of that particular country. So I'm sure it's very challenging, but so rewarding when people are able to rise above that.
It is. It's incredibly rewarding because, especially for women who are pushing back on cultural traditions that they believe to be outdated, what
Mhm.
they're doing is they're not just speaking up on their own behalf, they're
Mhm.
speaking up on their daughter's behalf,
Mhm.
on their future granddaughter's behalf, and they're creating change for generations. And that's incredibly exciting to see.
And that is leadership for sure. Absolutely. There are so many things I can ask you, and I love to talk to you about this, Allison, because we do work with similar audiences. As we said, I may do it differently. But let me ask you this one question, and I ask this of all my guests. If you can say there's one essential skill you need to speak, sound, and look like a leader, what would that be?
One essential skill that I would recommend is the skill of self-leadership.
Mm.
We cannot lead others before we first get to know ourselves, who we are, what drives us, why we do what we do. The act of self-leadership puts us in the right strategic mindset where now we can lead others, because we're not leading them from our own insecurities and fears. We're filling our own cup before we can fill the cups of others. That's what I would recommend.
That's wonderful. So it's like the oxygen first, right? Take the oxygen
Exactly.
so that you can
Put
help
the
them.
oxygen mask on your own face before you put it on others, before you assist others. Yes.
I love that. And that's very different from what I've heard so far from all the other people I've spoken with. So an excellent answer for that. Allison, how can people get in touch with you?
I would encourage people to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I would love to answer your questions that way. You can also go to my website, AllisonShapira.com, and I know you'll have that in the show notes, so they can find my website. And I would love to connect with any and all of your listeners, because if they're so invested in this topic to follow the work you do, I know that we'll all be in alignment, and I would love to connect.
Well, that's wonderful. And again, if we want to speak, sound, and look like leaders, there's a lot of advice here. And I love that you need to lead yourself first before you can take on anything else, so that it's not just self-serving, or I'm telling you what to do, even though I don't have the confidence to do it. That wouldn't work, wouldn't be authentic. Allison, thank you so much. I love listening to what you do. I love the way you add music to it and how you bring all of this together to help so many people with their speaking skills.
Thank you, Lynda. What a treat to spend time with you. I always learn from you every time we connect. So thank you for everything you do as well.
Sure, and the same here. And I love to hear all the different things that you do. Thanks again.